Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of Aisha Khan. A tale of control, honor, and an unthinkable crime. This case will leave you wondering, how far will someone go to protect their family's reputation? And when does love turn into something far more sinister? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of Aisha Khan. On the morning of March 12th, 2018, a jogger in a quiet suburban park stumbled upon something horrifying: a bloodied, lifeless body lying near the riverbank. The victim was a young woman, her face barely recognizable. As investigators arrived, one thing became clear: this was no accident. But who would commit such a brutal crime? And why? Aisha Khan was the kind of daughter every traditional family dreamed of: obedient, intelligent, and respectful. Born into a conservative Muslim household, she grew up knowing that family honor meant everything. Her parents, Farid and Samira, were deeply rooted in their cultural beliefs, ensuring their children upheld the values they had carried from their homeland. Aisha's older brother, Hassan, was no different. He took his role as the eldest son seriously, watching over his sister with quiet but unwavering authority. To those outside the family, Aisha's life seemed picture perfect. She excelled in her studies, rarely stepped out of line, and never questioned the path laid out for her. She wore modest clothing, observed family traditions, and respected the boundaries set for her. There were no parties, no late nights, no dating. Love, as she had always been told, was something that came after marriage, an arrangement made with care and respect, not reckless emotions. But behind the illusion of perfection, Aisha was hiding a secret that could destroy everything. It started innocently enough. She met Ryan Carter in a college literature class. He wasn't like the other boys she knew. He was carefree, open-minded, and curious about the world beyond textbooks. At first, she ignored the small moments that drew her toward him. The stolen glances, the conversations that stretched long after class ended, the way he made her laugh in a way she hadn't before. But emotions have a way of growing in silence, and before she could stop it, she had fallen in love. Aisha knew what this meant. Her family would never accept it. Ryan was everything they feared: an outsider, someone who could taint the traditions they had worked so hard to preserve. She told herself it was wrong, that it could never go beyond friendship. But love rarely listens to reason. Their relationship was built on secrecy. Every meeting was carefully planned, every phone call a risk. She deleted messages, avoided unnecessary glances in public, and constantly looked over her shoulder. Despite the fear, she felt something she never had before: freedom. Ryan didn't see her as a duty or an extension of her family's honor. To him, she was just Aisha, and for the first time she felt like she could be herself. But secrets have a way of surfacing. The first sign of danger came unexpectedly. Her cousin, Noor, had seen her with Ryan at a cafe just outside campus. Aisha noticed the way Noor's expression changed, how her eyes lingered a second too long. The discomfort in her stomach didn't leave her for the rest of the day. When she returned home that evening, everything felt different. There were no accusations, no confrontations, but the silence was heavy. Her father barely acknowledged her. Hassan's eyes lingered on her face, unreadable but sharp. Her mother moved through the house with a strange stillness, as if waiting for something to happen. Aisha knew then someone had told them. She tried to act normal, but the walls were closing in. Her phone disappeared from her room. When she asked about it, her mother only said it was for her own good. The next day, Hassan insisted on driving her to class. He never did that before. At college, she felt eyes on her, like invisible hands keeping her from moving too far, from making a mistake that couldn't be undone. Days passed, but the tension only grew. Her parents spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors. Family meetings were held late at night. Aisha felt trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. She wasn't just being watched, she was being controlled. And then, the worst happened. One evening, she managed to slip away to use a friend's phone. She sent a simple, desperate message: "Help me." But she had underestimated how closely she was being monitored. That night, she overheard a conversation that sent ice through her veins. Her father's voice was low, controlled. Hassan's reply was firm, unwavering. The words were few, but they were enough to confirm her worst fear. Her fate had already been decided. Aisha and Ryan's relationship had grown into something neither of them could control. What started as small moments between classes turned into late-night calls, secret meetings, and whispered promises of a future together. Ryan wanted her to be free, to live without fear, but Aisha knew the weight of her family's expectations. Every decision in her life had been carefully crafted to uphold their honor, and falling in love with an outsider was the ultimate betrayal. She had tried to resist. She told herself it was dangerous, that her parents would never allow it, but love has a way of ignoring consequences. With Ryan, she felt alive in a way she never had before. He spoke about dreams, about choices, about a life where she wasn't just someone's daughter or sister, but her own person. For the first time, she saw an escape from the path that had already been decided for her. But reality had a way of reminding her who she was. Noor's gaze at the cafe had been the first warning. The second came when her father called her into the living room that night. There was no shouting, no accusations, just a quiet, suffocating disappointment. He didn't ask if the rumors were true. He had already made up his mind. Aisha's protests meant nothing. She had broken their trust, and trust, once shattered, could never be fully repaired. From that moment, everything changed. Her phone was taken, her movements restricted, and her mother became a constant presence, watching her with sad, knowing eyes. At first, she thought this was the extent of her punishment, being cut off from Ryan, forced to stay within the boundaries of their world. But then she noticed the way Hassan lingered when she walked past, the way her father avoided looking at her directly. The whispers in the house grew. At night, she heard her parents speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors. Her name, spoken with quiet urgency, sent chills through her. She had never felt fear like this before, not even when she had first fallen in love with Ryan. This was different. This was the kind of fear that came when you realized something was happening just beyond your reach, something you couldn't stop. Ryan didn't give up. He found ways to reach her through friends, slipping her handwritten notes and short messages through people they trusted. He begged her to leave, to run away and never look back. But Aisha wasn't ready to make that choice. She still believed there was a way to make them understand, to show them that love didn't have to be a betrayal. Her mother tried to reason with her in her own way. There was no kindness in her words, just resignation. She spoke of duty, of expectations, of the shame Aisha had brought upon their family. Marriage was no longer a distant possibility, it was an immediate solution. Plans were being made. A proposal had already been arranged. A suitor had been chosen. The future was being set in stone, whether she agreed to it or not. That night, Aisha sat in the darkness of her room, heart pounding as she realized the truth. She wasn't being watched because they were angry. She was being watched because they were afraid she would ruin their plans. She had heard stories before, girls who had gone against their families, who had chosen love over duty, and had never been seen again. She had never believed them, until now. The next day, she overheard Hassan speaking with their uncle. The words were quiet, but their weight was crushing. The shame she had brought could not be undone. There was only one way to fix this. Aisha's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was about something much worse. She had to get out, and she had to do it before it was too late. Aisha knew she had to act fast. The walls were closing in, and the whispers had turned into decisions being made without her. Every moment she stayed in that house felt like a countdown to something inevitable. She had read stories about girls like her, about what happened when family honor was threatened. She had always believed she was safe, that those things only happened in distant places, to people who had no way out. But now she could feel it in the way they looked at her, the coldness in her father's eyes, the rigid silence from her mother, the way Hassan hovered too close. The realization struck her with the weight of finality. If she didn't leave now, she might never get the chance. Ryan was her only hope. He had been urging her to escape for weeks, but fear had held her back. Now, fear was the very thing pushing her forward. She managed to slip a note to a friend on campus, a desperate plea for Ryan to meet her at midnight near the old train station. It was a place she knew well, a quiet spot where they had once dreamed of a future together, where no one would think to look for her. She spent the day pretending nothing was wrong. She went through the motions, eating dinner with her family, nodding along to conversations she wasn't really hearing. Her hands trembled as she packed a small bag, taking only the essentials. Every sound made her heart pound, every creak of the floorboards, every movement outside her door. She knew she was being watched, but she had memorized every detail of the house, every exit, every possible way out. When the house finally fell silent, she slipped out of bed, heart hammering against her ribs. Her pulse was deafening in the stillness of the night. She made her way to the door, gripping the handle with shaking fingers. But just as she was about to step out, she felt a presence in the darkness. Her mother stood there, silent, eyes filled with something Aisha couldn't quite place. She wasn't angry. She wasn't pleading. She was just there, waiting. For a moment, time seemed to stretch between them. Then, before Aisha could move, footsteps echoed from the hallway. She had been caught. Within seconds, the quiet of the night shattered. Hassan appeared first, his expression unreadable, followed closely by their father. There was no yelling, no immediate violence, just a heavy, suffocating silence. They already knew. They had been waiting for this moment. Aisha barely had time to think before she was ushered back inside. The front door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate. Her father's voice was calm, too calm, as he told her she had one last chance to make things right. Hassan stood beside him, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. There was no room for argument, no space for negotiation. Her escape had failed. Her mother took her by the arm, guiding her toward the living room as if nothing had happened. The weight of their decisions pressed down on her like an unbearable force. The walls of her home, once familiar, now felt like a prison. Her mind raced, grasping for another way out, but there was none. Her father spoke in slow, deliberate words, making it clear that she would not be leaving the house again. Her future had already been decided. The engagement was moving forward, the suitor chosen, the arrangements underway. She would marry, she would forget, and she would become the daughter they had raised her to be. But Aisha knew the truth. This wasn't just about marriage. This was about something far more permanent. She had seen the fear in her mother's eyes. She had heard the whispered conversations late at night, and she had heard Hassan's words to their uncle. There was only one way to fix this. The realization sent ice through her veins. She wasn't being controlled anymore. She was being erased. Her escape had failed tonight, but she wouldn't let it fail again. Tomorrow would be her last chance. If she didn't get away, she wouldn't survive. Aisha lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body frozen in fear but her mind racing. Every breath felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on her. The quiet house around her was a deception. This wasn't safety, it was captivity. Her failed escape had only tightened the grip they had on her. She had seen the way her father avoided looking at her, the way her mother's face remained empty, the way Hassan stood too close, always watching. They weren't just disappointed. They were planning something. The morning came too soon. She moved mechanically, following the routine that was no longer hers. Every moment she was within reach of her family felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. They didn't need to say anything, she already knew what they had decided. The whispers had stopped. There were no more warnings, no more threats. That silence was more terrifying than anything they could have said. She was running out of time. Her engagement was being finalized. The man had been chosen. The date was being set. A life was being designed for her without her consent. It was no longer about whether she would obey. It was about eliminating the part of her that had dared to disobey in the first place. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. Her movements were careful, calculated. She searched for another way to reach Ryan. Her phone was still gone, her laptop monitored. But there were other ways. She slipped a note into her younger brother's backpack, hoping he wouldn't notice until he got to school. A simple message, midnight, train station. But she underestimated how closely she was being watched. That evening, her father left the house without explanation. Hassan was quieter than usual, his presence looming. Her mother didn't meet her eyes. Something had changed, and she didn't know what, but the way her stomach twisted told her it was nothing good. When night fell, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. There would be no second chances. If she failed this time, she wouldn't be able to try again. She had seen the signs, felt the inevitability of it all. The hushed conversations, the long phone calls, the way her family acted as if they were preparing for something final. Honor meant everything to them, and she had shattered it. She waited until the house was silent. Every step was measured, every sound magnified in her ears. Her heart pounded as she crept through the hallway, past the living room where her mother sat motionless in the dim light. Aisha held her breath, expecting her to stop her. But she didn't. She just sat there staring at nothing. For a moment she hesitated. But then she remembered the way Hassan had looked at her that morning. The decision had already been made. She slipped out the back door. The cold air hit her skin like a slap, shocking her back into focus. She moved quickly, knowing she had minutes, maybe less, before someone noticed. The train station was only a few blocks away, but every step felt endless. She expected footsteps behind her, a hand grabbing her shoulder, a voice calling her name. But there was nothing. Ryan was already there, waiting, eyes scanning the darkness. When he saw her, relief and fear flashed across his face. He reached for her, urgency in his movements, but before she could even speak, the sound of tires screeching against pavement shattered the night. A car sped toward them. Aisha's stomach dropped. She knew that car. The doors flew open before the vehicle even came to a stop. Hassan stepped out first, his face unreadable. Two other men followed, their presence suffocating. Ryan tensed beside her, realizing too late that they had been caught. Aisha didn't have time to think. Her only option now was to run. Aisha ran. Her breath came in sharp bursts, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The streetlights blurred as her feet pounded against the pavement, the cold night air cutting through her thin clothing. She could hear them behind her, fast, relentless. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Every second counted. Ryan was right beside her, pulling her forward, but she already knew this wouldn't end well. Hassan was faster, stronger, and he wasn't alone. She risked a glance back and saw them gaining ground. There was no escape in sight. The station was too far. They would catch her before she got there. A sharp turn into an alley was her only choice. She darted into the darkness, Ryan following close behind. The walls closed in around them, the space narrowing. She reached a dead end. Panic surged through her. There was no way out. Before she could move, a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her backward. The impact sent her crashing into the cold, hard pavement. Ryan lunged to stop them, but he was outnumbered. A heavy fist collided with his face, sending him sprawling. He groaned, struggling to get up, but another blow knocked him back down. Hassan loomed over her, his face devoid of emotion. The men with him didn't hesitate. Aisha tried to fight back, but she was powerless against their strength. They had come prepared, and she had never stood a chance. The struggle ended quickly. Pain radiated through her body as she was dragged toward the car. The street was empty, the world oblivious to what was happening. Her screams were swallowed by the night. The doors slammed shut. The drive back was silent. Her father was waiting when they arrived. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. She had defied them, shamed them, made a mockery of their honor. There was only one way to restore it. She was taken inside, locked away, left to sit in the crushing silence of what was to come. Time passed in a blur. Hours, maybe days. Food was brought to her but remained untouched. The walls felt smaller with each breath. Then, one night, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that signaled something final. The kind of quiet that meant a decision had been made. The door creaked open, and Hassan stood there, flanked by two others. There was no hesitation, no room for negotiation. She was led outside. The air was heavy, the darkness stretching endlessly before her. The weight of her fate pressed down on her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but facing it was something else entirely. Noor stood in the distance, watching. Her face was pale, her arms crossed tightly around herself. There was no comfort in her presence, only confirmation. Aisha had been sentenced. There was nothing left to say. The hands that grabbed her were firm. There was no struggle left in her. She had fought, she had run, she had tried. But in the end, it had never been her choice. A final prayer was whispered. Then, nothing. Days later, a missing persons report was filed. Ryan refused to believe what had happened. He searched, demanded answers, knocked on doors that refused to open, but no one spoke. No one admitted to what they had done. Aisha had vanished. Her name was spoken in hushed voices, in warnings to other girls who might dare to follow the same path. The truth was buried beneath silence, beneath fear, beneath a family's determination to erase their shame. But some secrets refused to stay hidden. And justice has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. What do you think about this case? Do you believe Aisha could have been saved? Let us know in the comments. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mystery Minds for more shocking true crime stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.